Sorry if I sound a little weird. I'm like super congested. My allergies are in full swing. But over this past week, I've been reading through the Epic of Gilgamesh, translated version, and I'll see if I can put the PDF I've been reading in like the description. Um, shouldn't be copyrighted because this was like published eons before anyone alive even knew what a copyright was. So I don't think we'll have problems. And so I'm a very verbal processor, and I do my best thinking through um, debate and conversation for certain. But the problem is I have no one to talk to about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and I have no one to talk to about a lot of the things I'm interested in. And I feel like I'm doing myself a disservice by um, not keeping track of my thoughts about these stories and these books and whatever I'm interested um, in a place for, conversation and discourse about it, because it inhibits my learning. Um, so that's what this is my idea. This is like a book club that's always open, right? And if you're ever reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, which I doubt many people are, but if you ever are, for school, for personal reasons, or whatever, this is my take on it. Um, I've only read the first three tablets, um, which I've found quite enjoyable so far. Um, We'll see if in this video I talk about tablets 2 and 3. I'm definitely going to talk about tablets 1. If I don't talk about tablets 2 and 3, I'll probably make another one talking about it. Um, and also, if you're watching this and you've read Epic of Gilgamesh and you want someone else to talk about another book or another text, or just say read that because I'm looking to do whatever to get off my freaking phone. It's killing my brain, bro. So we're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Um, so tablet one opens and it's just absolutely glazing Gilgamesh. Um, it starts off, it's like, he who has seen everything, I will make known to the lands. I will teach about him who experienced all things. And it basically goes through like the parents of Gilgamesh, how important he is for the city of Uruk, which is his home city. And then it also talks about the Ishtar temple. And this was something that was super duper interesting to me because I looked it up, and Ishtar uh, is related to the goddess Inna. And Inna was a sex prosperity goddess in like ancient Mesopotamia and in Uruk. And I found this super interesting because in the modern day, you don't see a lot of, dedication to fertility, like divinity of fertility in the world. And, people might say, oh, what about, the Christians? Like they believe in like the sanctity of the womb and all of that kind of stuff. But I think this is very different, and I'm going to tell you why. Because just a little bit later, it talks about Shamash. And this was another thing I had to Google. Apparently, Shamash is a like divinely ordained like consort or suitor to Gilgamesh. Right? Like him as the prospective leader of the city is supposed to wed and lay with Shamash, right? Um, and it was a very different relationship to divinity. And I've seen this throughout the three tablets I've read. A very different relationship to divinity than what we have today. And there's a lot of differences I've seen in this text that differ from how we view, philosophy today to how we viewed it back then. And when I started reading this, what I was really looking to get into was, what is some of the earliest recorded human um, writings and thought. And I think it's wondrous that Epic of Gilgamesh was what we got. I just spilled that everywhere. I think it's wonderful that Epic of Gilgamesh was what we got because if you ever read the Epic of Gilgamesh, it's very clear that this isn't just like a story to glaze Gilgamesh or Enkidu. I think it's clear that this is about um, you know, what people thought about the world at that time. And maybe that's just a retrospective to a cultural story um, that's being revisited like centuries later. But to me, there's just so much about this text that screams that it's about um, much more than just like, oh, Gilgamesh does this, Gilgamesh does that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But moving on. So it describes like Gilgamesh's rise and why he's so famous in Uruk. But it also contrasts that with, let's see, it talks about how he's kind of an egomaniac a little bit, which was my interpretation. Um, He's kind of a huge egomaniac. It's like he walks around the enclosure of Uruk like a wild bull who makes himself mighty. And with the perspective I have now, having read the other three tablets, what I think this was trying to say is that um, the the like because there's a clear division between the natural world and civilization in this book, which is super duper interesting. Um, how cleanly the distinction is drawn, and that there was a concept of city life, um, but there was also a life outside of that. And they were kind of at conflict, but I think that the story argues more for unity and balance rather than division. But it does a good job of um, kind of showcasing the mind of these people at the time and how civilization formed. Because the writer, um, this is something you don't see a lot in modern writing either. In modern writing, I think you see a lot of bias for nature, where, nature is pure and civilization a lot of the times is what causes the evil. And that's evident in, um, what's a good example of that? Even like Star Wars, right? In Star Wars, the most divine power, the light side of the Force, is rooted in the inherent goodness that all living things have. And the Sith side is a corruption based on lies and these social concepts and manipulation that only come into fruition when you're in contact with large numbers of people. So in modern media, I think we see more the opposite of what happens in the Epic of Gilgamesh, where instead of arguing for, a more natural approach to life, the safety of cities was seen as very like divine. Um, the safety and also this was when writing was first coming about, and I think um, I mean the person who either narrated and the scribe, both of them, I guess we'll never know where the bias actually came in, which is interesting. A story this old. Um, uh, these scholars in these cities evidently had a bias for civilization over nature, while at the same time acknowledging that there was a balance. and I wrote this in my notes a little bit later, but I think it's a great thought to bring up, which is that the civilized man, Gilgamesh, becomes a more like natural in existence person via Enkidu. And Enkidu, the embodiment of kind of like the the nomadic man, um, he becomes more civilized. And in that way, I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is a very centrist. It's a very centrist piece in what I imagine was one of the great questions of its time, where you had pockets of civilization where, people were coming together, they were living in one spot, but also all across the world, you had nomads and these people who were hunter-gatherers. Oh, I need to blow my nose, is what needs to happen. You had these hunter-gatherers, and it probably raised a question in the minds of philosophers, like early philosophers and the people who wrote this. Is it right for man to civilize? Is that, you know, what is the morality of that? Um, and then a question I have that I've yet to see explored in the three tablets I've read is, whether or not the civil, because it was written, meaning it's not an oral tradition. Um, because in the city of Uruk, they have writing, they have the Ishtar temple, they have worship, they have building, they have writing. There are scribes, there are poets, there are elders, right? This is a civilization that probably had writing. Being that it is a written piece, and there is this contrast and conflict between the people who are still living the hunter-gatherer lifestyle and the people who are living in civilization that clash. One thing I've yet to see explored is, um, you know, how philosophers felt at that time about the philosophies of the natural world. Um, and it's not really explored. But anyways, moving on. They describe Gilgamesh, and then later, uh, when the gods hear the cries of the people being like, "Get this egomaniac Gilgamesh out of here! This guy's nuts!" Um, the gods are like, "All right, bro, you need to make a counter, like the word they use is zikru, which I translated, and it was a rhythmic repetition to remember or glorify God. And I interpreted this as like either you need to make an echo of the divinity of Gilgamesh, uh, and then it says to equal his stormy heart and have them be matches for each other. And at first, I thought this was a I thought this was a call for conflict almost. And at first, I think the narrators paint it to be that way, like make them each other's match in a fighting sense. But what happens later? Spoilers for the multi-century, like 1,000-year-old, like ancient text, the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you're concerned about spoiler warnings, they end up becoming great friends. And the way they describe their friendship is very much a love. And they don't differentiate it between romantic and platonic love, which is another very interesting thing. Um, Gosh, my allergies, bro, this is bad. Um, they become great friends, and I believe at one point in the text, um, Gilgamesh is said to or told to by either his mother or an advisor. His mother is like a spiritual leader, queen figure in Uruk, to take Enkidu as his wife. and to treat him with the love and reverence that he would treat a prospective wife. Um, I also might be misremembering that, and that's the passage where he is about to marry uh, Shamash. But either way, there's a theme of love and friendship, very strong love and friendship later on in the story between Enkidu and Gilgamesh, because they are perfect foils to each other. But anyways, so Enkidu is created in the wilderness, unlike Gilgamesh, who is created in civilization. Um, Enkidu is like it's stated. It says it right here. I've got this pulled up like split screen. Um, it says he knew neither people nor settled living. So truly like a wild figure, like someone who is uh, as far removed from civilization as one can be, a figure who's never known another person before. Uh, and then trappers encounter him and they go and tell Gilgamesh. Um, and they actually, this part was interesting to me, which is that they send Shamash to lay with Enkidu, uh, to bring uh, to bring civilization to him. And this was interesting to me because to me this was uh, a very direct link between human reproduction and civilization. And I also found it very interesting that a society which is newly civilized and has had little time to become disenfranchised with the idea of civilization, um, a society which truly loves itself and believes that what it's doing has merit, um, places its values in very different baskets than we do today. I think in the modern world, contrasted to the Epic of Gilgamesh, we've had a lot of time now to get used to civilization and living a domesticated life. And living this, sorry, my allergies are killing me. And they've been killing me for like days, broski, when I tell you, days. Um, but yeah, in modern civilization, we've had a lot of time to get acclimated and find out that, um, and this was, culture looked very different, I believe, for nomads. I think when your life is on the line every day, and you and your pack mates have your lives in each other's hands constantly, there is a bond on a deeper level that modern cultures don't have. And my point for that is like, if you're a nomad, if you're a hunter gatherer, right? Way back when, way back near the city of Uruk in like 1200 before Common Era. I I think if one of the people in your tribe was, and I think this ties back to, and I think there's some evidence to support this in this text. Now, this might be a personal issue, speaking as a gay man, but I think there's some evidence here about kind of the naturalness of uh, same-sex relationships and very like and humans being, queer historically, is that there's not a line drawn between romantic love and the love that two friends or two male people can have for each other, two female people can have for each other, two people of any gender can have for each other. And maybe I'm woke. Maybe I'm woke for reading it this way, but um, this was before culture had shifted to be in favor of um, ethics over survival. And this was the very, I think the Epic of Gilgamesh is the very beginning that we have recorded of people asking ethical questions that extended beyond survival. Because if you were a hunter-gatherer tribe and you kill a member of another hunter-gatherer tribe because it benefited your survival and it benefited the tribe's survival, ugh, and it benefited the tribe's survival, you were given a you were given two things. First of which is a feedback loop of repetitive feedback to encourage um, survival behavior in the brain. Um, and so that's one thing you got, which certainly extinguished the idea behind the ethical question of is it right to kill for survival? Because it's not really a question. You have, on one hand, the lives of the people you've known your whole life, and to them, it's much more numerous than there was not any kind of technological power advantage or anything. If you kill one person from another tribe, it's one person from another tribe. But in your mind, for your side, it's all of the people you've ever known, right? So that killing is kind of justified, I believe, in that strand of thought. Um, because it's a very simple action. It's the most natural thing that people did was defend themselves and hunt. Um, and animals have been doing that forever. So I think that extinguishes the ethical question. But the second thing is you were living through a life of near constant, um, like peril and danger. You're living through this experience every day. And when you're in those life or death situations every day, where unlike in modern society, where I can choose not to go to the grocery store, where I even have access to a grocery store, right? I don't have to go out and work for my food, and I don't have to kill for my food. I don't have to scavenge for my food. Um, and in the civilization I live in, there's a substantial lack of, people competing for the resources that they need to live. It's just no longer the reality we live in. But if you did live in that reality and that was your everyday life, I think that serves to extinguish the moral questions of it because I think human instinct descended from our evolution from animals was to my second pen of the video that I've taken out with the Hamburglar on it. I'm, dude, I'm like a McDonald's brand advocate on this channel. I've got the Grimace notebook. I've got the Hamburglar pen. Um, I don't like McDonald's that much, guys. I just have these things, and this is a very comfortable pen to hold and I can grip. And the Grimace notebook is a very convenient notebook, not some sort of advert for McDonald's on this channel. Certainly not. Certainly not. If anything, I'm the opposite of an advert for McDonald's. I think that it's very unhealthy. And that's coming from someone who works at a McDonald's and eats a McDonald's meal at least 5 times a week, which I need to stop doing because I think it's having negative implications on my health. Um, but anyways, if you were, living that life every day, Um, Number one, you don't really have time to question the ethicality of your actions, but also at that point in time, the human brain was hardwired directly from, well, it still is hardwired directly from our ancestors, but we were much closer historically to, uh, uh, you know, pre-human, uh, pre-human bipeds, uh, whose whole life was less lucid and less conscious, um, which is something that fascinates me a lot. I think about this regularly, which is, um, we've talked about consciousness consistently throughout human existence, and especially throughout written human thought. But my question that lingers is, has the human the human consciousness evolved over time to be different from what it was initially? Because I think these early humans, I mean, evidently they were conscious, they could produce some incredible art, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, but their consciousness might have been entirely different from ours in a very unique way. Um, in terms of philosophical thought and, how the brain perceived life and perceived itself could be vastly different and we would never know. And I think that that is something that we as people should start recording and we should start conversing about. And I suppose that's what art is, right? It's like, oh, well, how was I looking at the world? But I think we need a more scientific analysis of this a little bit, to understand what, because I think there's truth in both the fact that the reality you live in can be influenced by your consciousness. And I do believe that you absolutely can exert control over your consciousness in a number of ways. But I also think that the environment you've grown in and you've existed in does fundamentally change your conscious. And for people who have lived in vastly different realities, the the like the way their brains functioned could have been entirely different, especially so long ago. And it's kind of infuriating to me because I'll never get to know. And I can see like mild generational differences in the way people perceive and the way people are conscious, but such a vast divide of time. Um, I think with a time machine, that would be all I would be entertained for the rest of my life to go and to interact and to see, in what way do these people really experience the world. Uh, but back to the Epic of Gilgamesh. See, um, this is why I suck at doing, like, I need another person to talk to because if I don't, I have no one to interrupt me. And I'll just keep yapping and keep thinking about who knows whatever. Um, but anyways, they send Shamash to lay with Enkidu, and it's bringing the civilized world to the natural world. It's a meeting of that, and they do. And uh, there was an interesting. I thought this was interesting. Um, so there's a vivid description of their encounter uh, in this text, but also uh, what was interesting is in a world where they worship a fertility goddess, and in a world where that's associated with civilization, which is seen as a philosophical good, because I mean, my understanding of why it seems like a philosophical good to have civilization is pretty I feel like that's a pretty simple problem to solve if you take a civilization of people and they develop writing, they begin to develop ethics. And the development of ethics is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, um, because ethics is the study of being good, and you can only do that if you have writing, which comes from civilization. So that's where that comes in. Fertility is directly tied to bringing about civilization, which is bringing about more ethics. Uh, but they describe Shamash or Shamat. It goes back and forth, man. I could be complete. Let me double check right now, actually, to make sure I'm not in video. Let me Google it. Shamash. Epic of Gilgamesh. I've been lying to you guys. Um, Shamash is the sun god. Shamat. I mixed those two up because they're very similar. Shamat is the uh, like uh, the divine escort from the Ishtar temple. Shamash is the sun god. So if at any point in this video, I'm not gonna re-record. I don't care that much. Um, if you're a historian, or a big Epic of Gilgamesh fan, and that's your fandom right there, and you're writing down in the comments, you're saying, "Uh, actually, Shamash is the Mesopotamian sun god of justice, and Shamat is the divinely ordained uh, escort from the Temple of Ishtar." Um, I'm going to put this timestamp under your comment if you didn't watch the whole video, and you're going to feel called out for being a chud, because you are. Um, and you should have just read my mind. And, you know, what I meant. But anyways, so they talk about Shamash, and they describe leading up to it. They the elders and Gilgamesh are kind of telling Shamat, you're gonna go do this with Enkidu. Um, this is verbatim how they describe it. Spread out your robe so he can lie upon you. This is still in tablet one, by the way. We're gonna have a long series for this because I evidently cannot get through a tablet of this wonderful text in any short amount of time. There's a lot to chew on. Um, so it says, spread out your robe so he can lie upon you and perform for this primitive the task of womanhood. And this was super interesting to me because it countered what I had read so far, which was a kind of a worship and a reverence for fertility and engagement in the engagement in procreation for the sake of civilization. And then it was contrasted by a kind of early sexism and saying that, um, this action that does bring civilization into the world, um, I think it's the narrator who's biased towards it and is describing it as um, a primitive task, despite the fact that he acclaims the values of civilization. And in Uruk, the city where this takes place, there is fertility. They still have the men describing it as primitive on the part of the woman and not the part of any other party. Um, so it's entirely possible that this guy was just an absolute incel chud. But it's also entirely possible that there were complicated social dynamics between men and women at the time that I can't even begin to pretend to understand. Um, maybe my best guess would be that with the advent of civilization, there was uh, a kind of uprising in purity culture as a result of bringing civilization. You have the creation of houses, the creation of private spaces, but at this time uh, it was for the first time people were being distanced from a life where they spent a majority of their time in close contact with others. Um, that was happening for the very first time, and so maybe there was some early Puritanism in these cities um, because people were having a moment for the first time where, and we have this moment today. You probably, if you've got some friends, you've probably got that one friend who's telling you wild stories about their like bedroom life, and you're like, I don't need to know that, dude. This could be that for the first time, maybe. That might be my guess. Or this guy's a child. Those are my two darts thrown at the dartboard there. Um, but yeah, they do that for a long time, and then they describe it interestingly afterwards. This was another counter to my idea of civilization and how they've promoted it to be very meritful. Um, After engaging in the act of domestication, and Kidu engaging in the act of domestication, it says his body was utterly depleted. Um, uh, and I actually think this one is much less interesting because this one was marked with a question mark um, next to the word depleted in the PDF, which means that they don't have a direct translation for the word. It's more of a guesstimation, a very smart one, probably, at what it means. And I think what I'm going to interpret it as is rather than his physical strength being drained or anything like that, um, I think it's describing um, God, this channel is gonna get demonetized for me saying the craziest stuff, bro. Um, for the what's a good way I can word this so it doesn't sound weird? Um, well, I don't, whatever. He's got sexual satisfaction basically after this encounter with Shabbat. Um, and then Shabbat takes him to a city. Uh, and she says to Enkidu some very interesting things. She talks about, what the merits of civilization are for Enkidu. Uh, and she says specifically, where people show off in skirted finery, where every day is a day for some festival, where the drum and lyre play continually, where harlots stand prettily, and and then later it says, and on the couch of night the sheets are spread. And this to me was a bit of a revelation because I've been reading it and I've been hearing all this stuff about how, oh, civilization is, well, I've been interpreting that civilization is the root of ethics. And this was where the meaning of the story and the moderacy of the story really came into focus because it was this specific paragraph from Shama to Enkidu was a telling of what you'll like about this city is the yes, yes, it's civilization. Yes, there are people, but also a an acceptance and an embracing of uh, the same things they had called primitive earlier in terms of sexuality. So this was where I saw, um, yes, civilization is, the origin of ethics, yeah, but it's also the origin of another kind of primitivism, which I think primitivism is the wrong word. I think what I should be saying is carnal desire. It's civilization is a playground for the desires of man because prior to civilized life, everything is life or death, right? And yes, they had like celebrations. Yes, they had practices. Yes, I'm sure that they danced and the women danced, but it's it's different because there's much more room within civilization to engage with that for extended periods of time without an interruption, which is the hunter-gatherer life beyond that, which was an expansive life, full of much larger parts rather than that carnal desire. And that's what I really think they were talking about earlier. This is when I came into focus when they say the primitive action of Shemot. Maybe it's not sexist. This is the secret third option. Maybe it's not sexist. Maybe primitive didn't have a negative connotation as it does now. Uh, so that could be interesting. And she tells Enkidu of civilization, and then Gilgamesh wakes up. It like cuts the scene. Gilgamesh wakes up. It reads kind of like a big poem, and it basically is, but it's a great poem. So the stanza cuts. It's a new scene, and Gilgamesh wakes up and he says to his mother he dreams about a meteorite that falls next to him. And this is like the first thing in his life which he's not strong enough to move. And the people of Uruk assemble around it, and they loved it. And he was unsure of how to feel about this. Um, and his mother basically tells him, she's like, the people of Uruk accept this as a good thing. You're the leader of Uruk. And this is the very first, from my knowledge, instance of you know philosophical writing about what it is to be a leader. And it's this beautiful segment of the poem where uh, Gilgamesh's mother, who symbolizes wisdom, says to Gilgamesh, she says, "What's good for the people of Uruk is good for you because you're the leader of Uruk and you're supposed to do right by these people. And you, this mighty meteorite, which obviously is a symbol for Enkidu, the impending uh, strength to match Gilgamesh. Um, she says, you, even if it insults your pride to not have a meteorite you can't move, if the people of Uruk love that meteorite, you as their leader must also love the meteorite." And it was an early foreshadowing of the thoughts that people would talk about when it comes to leadership, pretty much up until Machiavelli, um, with this idea that the strong man, the strong leader, can stomach more than the average person. Um, Whereas Machiavelli obviously taught that um, rather than pushing your own agenda to the side as a leader, if you really want to rise to power in the system he existed in, you had to be self-interested in. Um, and I have some thoughts on that. I have some thoughts on Machiavelli's writings. A lot of people think Machiavelli was like a bad guy for writing what he did. I don't think he was a bad guy at all. Um, I think he wrote a brilliant critique of the civilized world. And he said, in the civilized world, as it has evolved, as it has proceeded dialectically, at the current stage we're at, if a man wants to lead and uh, be a powerful figure in the world, he can't subside his own interests, and he has to act egotistically and manipulatively to amass power to make any sort of change, regardless of good or bad, which he wants to see in the world. Um, Even though good or bad is subjective in that sense, um, because I do believe that, when people talk about history being written by the winners, in retrospect, we can only look at morality as subjective for the majority of cases. Um, because you don't inspire a cause without there being a societal consensus where that cause was inspired, that the actions you were taking were justified. Um, so morality in retrospect is almost always subjective. Um, and people lose sight of that. People are like, oh, well, there were clear-cut good guys and bad guys in World War II. And it's a much more complicated question than a lot of people make it out to seem. Obviously, obviously, the Holocaust was one of the worst things to ever happen in human history. Um, Obviously, that was very wrong, but the the imperialism and the the actions taken by other countries preceding that conflict have similar moral conundrums and similar moral issues with the framework under which they operated. And so you can acknowledge how wrong people were historically, but it's a gross oversimplification of history to say that there was not um, any kind of moral framework behind which any movement in history has operated. Um, but anyways, yeah, so this is the first message to the leaders of the world saying, what the Catholic Church and all of these religions preached since the dawn of civilization, which is that um, this selflessness is what makes a good leader. Um, in the same way that the like Machiavelli's The Prince kind of contrasts the Christ figure or Muhammad, these people who in their respective religions were shown to be selfless. This was the first instance, I think, telling Gilgamesh, who's kind of almost a demigod like figure. I wouldn't be surprised if, regardless of if this is fiction or nonfiction, there were people at any given point in time who revered Gilgamesh as a quasi deity, because of the great strength that he is told to have in this text. But this is in this section where uh, his mother tells Gilgamesh what he ought to do. Oh, it also, by the way, now that I'm down here and I'm reading it, I talked about this earlier. It does say to love Enkidu as a wife. So that's my evidence for early queer activism is that there was a much less division um, prior to kind of this wave of Puritanism that civilization brought. Um, because there's a lot of watching in civilization, despite the fact that there's also an increased. Hmm, I actually don't know about increased privacy. Because if you're hunter-gatherers, you can go fuck off to a part of the woods no one's ever going to touch again. But if you're in civilization, even if you're in a private space, there's a, a distinguished element of privacy that I think was lost. Uh, maybe. That's something I'll have to do more research on. I'm actually going to take note of. I like that a lot. Privacy in the evolution of privacy in civilization. Um, but anyways, yes, that's how the first tablet ends. And to be completely honest, um, I think if I start talking about tablet two, this is going to be a 3 hour long video. Um, I meant for this to be like maybe 20 minutes, but I guess I got sidetracked. But anyways, so tablet one ends with, um, you know, Gilgamesh being told to love Enkidu, who is nature, uh, before he arrives. And it also ends with Enkidu being told he's going to love civilization, which is Gilgamesh. So they're told they're going to love each other, but they're also um, almost kind of destined for conflict. There's constant imagery of, the rock. This guy can't move. The rock, Gilgamesh, can't move, and Enkidu being the perfect match to disrupt the the ego and the power trip of Gilgamesh within Uruk. Um, so it ends with a very good contrast between the two, and I was blown away reading Tablet One. When I picked it up, I was like, I was kind of thinking, well, what could the people of Uruk really have been thinking about? They were thinking about some real stuff. They were thinking about some questions we still think about today. Some questions we still don't have answers to. But I think it's certainly a mistake to rule out philosophers, especially early ones, and to say that their ideas are outdated because there's broad themes in some of these philosophers' work. And like, yes, when Karl Marx talks about certain things, they're no longer relevant. Um, like, especially when he talks about the state of the German nation. Almost all of the things he says about Germany, um, I don't think really fit modern Germany because the system's changed. Germany was a monarch when Karl Marx wrote Capital, and so it's a similar thing where Marx's ideas still have value today, but some of the more detailed parts of his work about specifically that time period in Germany no longer have much relevance. But I really loved the first tablet. I've read two since then. I'm gonna keep trying to punch through it to get off my phone. But yeah, expect Epic of Gilgamesh Tablet 2, Electric Boogaloo, the breakdown to come soon for the the probably like two people who will ever see a video being like, oh, here's like an hour-long video of this 18-year-old in a fucking America shirt talking. Ooh, I swore. I should not have done that. I was trying not to swear the whole video. Cat's out of the bag, guys. Cat's out of the bag, guys. I have a potty mouth. But to the couple people who will ever watch this video, this 55-minute long video of just a video of me talking to you about the Epic of Gilgamesh, I doubt anyone will ever actually watch this video all the way through. Not even me. Um, but yeah, the Epic of Gilgamesh, I think more people should read it. I think it's a great foundation piece to approach the philosophical thought of humanity throughout history. And that's what I was looking to get out of it. That's what I've been getting out of it so far. And that's my breakdown of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Tablet 1.